Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 4, where we will cover chapters 5 and chapter 6. Chapter 5 will deal with sensation and perception, while chapter 6 will deal with learning. Let's begin chapter 5, sensation and perception. So what do you experience when you see the color red or eat chocolate? If you are like most people, you experience red as a visual phenomenon. You may associate this color with stoplights or stop signs. You experience eating chocolate as a sweet taste. You may associate this taste with pleasure. Every moment of your life, you are processing information from your senses, consciously or unconsciously. But some people have pretty strange descriptions for their experiences. William hates driving because to him, the sight of road signs tastes like a gross mixture of pistachio ice cream and earwax. For Michael, any personal name has a specific taste. For example, the name John tastes like cornbread. Another person experiences each day of the week or month of the year as a particular color. Monday is red, Tuesday is indigo, December is yellow, and so on. Other people experience colors as smells, sights as sounds, or sounds as colors and shapes. This condition, where sensory input in one form triggers an additional experience in another form, is called synesthesia. It's in your book if you want to know how to spell it. If you have never experienced synesthesia, it is almost impossible to imagine. Indeed, each person who has synesthesia experiences it in a very personal and consistent way. For example, a certain number printed in black ink may always appear to be one particular color. Estimates of the percentage of the population that reports these cross-sensory experiences range from 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 200. And reports of people with synesthesia date as far back as ancient Greece. Research into synesthesia can give us insight into how people process sensory input, as well as how our brains help us perceive sensory information in our own unique ways. The perceptual system is stunningly intelligent in its ability to guide us around. For example, right this minute, your brain is making millions of calculations to produce a unified experience of your environment. Your abilities to see, hear, taste, smell, and touch emerge from these brain processes. So a little introduction there. Let's continue. We are looking at sensation and perception in this chapter, where we'll go on to learning objective 1. Your senses detect physical stimuli, and your brain processes perception. So sensation is the detection of physical energy by our sense organs, which send that information to the brain. So sensation is basically the raw data that comes into the system. The light waves impacting our retinas and the sound waves going into our ears. Sensation is just sensing that information coming from the outside world. But when we initially sense it, we don't know yet what it is. That is in the next step. Perception is the brain's interpretation of the raw sensory data. It's kind of like recognition. Like I am seeing a computer right now, or I am hearing a lawnmower. So perception is when you make sense of the incoming information. So on the next two slides, we'll look at the journey from sensation to perception. And this starts with sensory receptors. Let me start this way. External physical stimuli, for example, light waves, are detected by specialized cells, which we call sensory receptors. Each of your senses has these specialized sensory receptor cells for detecting different types of external physical stimuli. So you have, sensory receptors in your eyes to detect light waves, and you got sensory receptors deep in your ear canals to detect sound waves, and you have sensory receptors on your tongue to detect taste, etc. Through a process called transduction, the sensory receptors convert the physical stimulus, that is like the light waves or the sound waves, into neural signals. So transduction is converting physical energy into brain language, basically. Um, Everything coming from the outside world, sound waves or light waves or taste molecules, they've got to be converted to neural. When I say brain language, I mean neural impulses. It's kind of like, think of your computer. You have pictures stored in your computer or your phone. You have pictures, you have videos stored, you have sounds like music stored. You might have, word files. But, if you could tear your computer apart and you're not going to find that picture or that video or those sounds. I mean, the inside the computer, they're all converted to computer language, bits and bytes or however they do it now. It used to be, binary code and ones and zeros, but I don't know if things are different now. But it's all, whether it's a picture or video or a sound file, it all gets converted into basic computer language. Same thing's happening with our brain. It doesn't matter if it's light waves or sound waves or touch sensation or smell or taste. It all has to be converted into neural impulses, which I call brain language. That's how everything gets stored in your brain. And that is the transduction process, changing the light waves or sound waves into neural impulses. So this figure here summarizes the 4 steps in the process of changing sensory input into a personal experience. This example is for the sensation and perception of vision, but the steps basically in general, they also apply to hearing or taste or smell or touch. However, the only difference is information about smell is not processed through the thalamus in step 4, which we'll get to shortly. So let's run through. I've already talked about a few of these things. Let's run through the pictures here. You've got some kind of physical stimulus in the outside world, in the environment. So, for instance, you're waiting at a light and the traffic light turns green. There are light waves that come from that light, and that's the physical stimulus. The light waves get detected by your sensory receptors in your eyes, and that is sensation. It means that, there's that something from the external world is entering into your nervous system. Transduction, remember, that's changing things into brain language. So the sensory receptors translate the physical stimulus into neural impulses or signals. As it says here, those signals become neural signals. And then at this point, you still don't know that you've seen a green light until the final stage of perception. The neural signals travel along nerve fibers, first passing through the thalamus. Remember, that's called the relay station. And all of your senses pass through there except for smell. And then to the appropriate sensory cortex. And so in this case, it'll be the visual cortex because this involves vision. So it's going to go back to the back of your brain and the occipital lobe to the visual cortex. And this is when perception takes place. Perception is like recognition. Oh, that the light changed green. So it's like when you make sense of what you have sensed already. Perceiving is like making sense of it. It's knowing what it is that you've just heard or saw or touched or tasted. And these are the 4 steps of sensation and perception. So, excuse me. In a sense, I mean, we think of our eyes as seeing, and obviously, like, we use our eyes to see, like, but remember, it's your eyes aren't actually doing the seeing, really. It's really your visual cortex. I mean, you have no idea. Your eyes are just gathering information, light waves, you know, external stimuli, light waves from the outside world, and then transducing them into neural impulses, and then you'd finally, realize what you're seeing with your visual cortex. So that is where you actually see things. Okay, going on here, and this will be the final slide of learning objective one. Except for smell, all sensory input travels to the thalamus, as I said earlier, and then on to cortical regions that process information about touch, vision, hearing, taste, and smell. If we look at the diagram here, we can see that the five senses, the primary sensory areas are shown for each. So at the top, we have the primary somatosensory cortex, where touch information goes. That's in the parietal. It's at the very front of the parietal lobe. Then, if kind of going around clockwise, we get to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe at the back of the brain for vision. For hearing, we've got the primary auditory cortex, which is within the temporal lobe. Moving on, we have the primary gustatory cortex. That's where we process taste information. It is part of the parietal lobe. It may not look like it, but it's actually part of the parietal lobe. And then we have the primary olfactory cortex, where we process smell, and that's also part of the temporal lobe. Once again, I mean, in this picture, they make it look like it's part of the frontal lobe, but it is part of the temporal lobe, actually. Okay. So anyways, these are the five primary sensory areas. It's in these areas that perception takes place. This is, when you transduce, when your tongue sensory receptors transduce the taste molecules from whatever you're eating, the signals get sent to the first of all to the thalamus, and then to the primary gustatory cortex. And at that moment, it's like, I'm tasting something sweet, or I know what I can recognize something about what's in my mouth right now. So this is perception takes place in each of these areas. And that will conclude learning objective one.